Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Young, and I am the audience and events producer at the Bangor Daily News. For those of you in the audience tonight who are subscribers, thank you for your support. If this is your first BDN online event, welcome. If you believe that local journalism is a force for good in the world, please support that here in Maine with a subscription to the Bangor Daily News. We'd like to thank the Pulitzer Center for its support of this forum, as well as our tourmaline sponsor for this event, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. As a reminder, this event is being recorded. We will be taking questions from the audience towards the end of the discussion. If you have a question for any of our guests, please use the chat or Q&A functions and we will pose the questions on your behalf. In a bit, I'll turn it over to Erin Rhoda, our editor for investigations, and investigative reporter Callie Ferguson. On the BDN Maine Focus team, they have written a great deal about law enforcement. Last year, the team published a series examining the holes in accountability for county sheriff's offices. After analyzing more than 1,300 pages of discipline records, they found that sheriffs were less likely to disclose details of officer misconduct when the officers faced the severest sanctions. That means there are instances where the public cannot even know why an officer was fired. The team also examined state licensing records and discovered that police and corrections officers had kept their certifications despite repeatedly lying to their supervisors and sexually harassing colleagues and prisoners. In other states, the officers likely would have lost their license. Recently, Erin and Callie worked together with Matt Byrne, a reporter from a competing newspaper, the Portland Press-Herald, to publish another investigative series on how the Maine State Police conceals officer wrongdoing. They found that out of 65 proven cases of officer misconduct over the last 6 years, the Maine State Police had records of discipline in only 20 cases. Of those 20 individual discipline records, only 7 had enough detail to determine why the officers got in trouble. Today, we're going to turn our attention to the state policy on law enforcement oversight. We'll discuss the bills that are being crafted in Maine amid a national examination of policing and hear from 3 lawmakers who are at the center of several of the proposals. Erin?
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being here, especially our lawmaker guests who are very busy and in the middle of holding public hearings and work sessions on many bills right now. We are holding this event to take a step back and listen and have a conversation about what can be a highly charged topic. If you are here watching, you likely have opinions about law enforcement oversight. Our goal is not to change those opinions, it's to deepen our understanding. How society manages law enforcement is a complicated issue. As Callie and I have written about police in the past, we have realized just how impossible it is to predict what people will say and do. Some police officers have risked their careers to speak with us about other officers' misconduct because they saw those officers as undermining their very important profession, and they saw their police leaders as under-equipped to respond. We've also seen longtime state leaders who were once reticent to speak, change course, and provide forceful public testimony. We've seen other leaders back away from proposals they once supported. So I say that to remind all of us to not assume we understand people's positions or motivations or backgrounds. For instance, you might not guess that I am 9 months pregnant, but it is true, and I am still here. So lawmakers are in key roles of oversight. So we've invited 3 to be part of this discussion tonight. They all come from different parts of the state and belong to different parties or no party. We will put their full bios in the chat function so you can read more about them. But here we have Senator Lisa Keim, a Republican from Dixfield in Western Maine, Representative Jeffrey Evangelos, an independent from Friendship on the coast, and Representative Charlotte Warren, who's a Democrat from D-Hallowell in Central Maine. So Callie is going to start us off with some questions.
Thanks, Erin. All right, so Representative Warren, I'd like to start with you. The protests and the demonstrations that followed the murder of George Floyd forced the nation to examine the state of policing in America. Given your leadership role in the Criminal Justice Committee, do you see the slate of law enforcement bills in Maine, or any of your bills in particular, as a response to the national examinations of police accountability? And has the national conversation around policing made you think differently or changed your perspective at all on policing practices and oversight in Maine?
Thank you, Callie, for the question. And just let me say thank you for the opportunity to be here and for everybody participating today. For me, I have served on the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. This is my 7th year. So I've been looking at these issues for a long time. I think what's changed is the conversation has sort of garnered more attention. So for me, I've been pushing for reform since I was a very first term legislator. So I wouldn't say that what's happened nationally has changed what I'm working on. I think people are just paying more attention to what I'm working on.
Has that, do you have any specific examples of how that's helped you, or, changed your conversations or partnerships or conflicts with people in the last year?
Yeah, I mean, a great example is, I have a bill in that we're working on with the Maine Information Analysis Center, which is the Fusion Center. I think the papers sort of refer to it as the secret spy program of the Maine State Police, which is a good description of it, because that is what it is. And it's sort of like, people think that, it was referred to recently as part of the defund the police movement. I had my first bill about MIAC in 2015. So the two things are not connected. But how it's changed is that, people are actually paying attention. And also I think that, people in 2015 kind of thought I was a nutball for wanting to do something about MIAC. And I'm sure some people still do, but I think people are now seeing that we need to do some reform. And that isn't just me and the folks that I'm here on the panel with. I just want to say that that's also law enforcement, that's also the judiciary, that's also reporters like you all. We all sort of are coming to the agreement that something needs to change, and that's okay. We just need to look at it through a new lens and make some tweaks, and that's what we're attempting to do.
You referenced, how long you've been in the legislature and what you've been trying to do, and it kind of tees up my next question for you, which was in 2017, you did an interview with your alma mater, the University of New England, and you talked about how your master's degree in social work gave you a broader perspective on society that affects your work in the legislature. And specifically in that interview, you said, quote, "I can very clearly see that the problems that I'm here trying to solve are created by a system that needs to be changed, and in many ways to create more opportunity for folks." So my question is, to what degree are your bills intended to change the system as it relates to law enforcement, as opposed to piecemeal efforts, and how?
It is all about changing the system. And thank you for making that connection for me, because for all of us, because, what we are seeing and what we need to remember, and all of this conversation about good apples and bad apples and et cetera, it's not about the people. It's not about me or Lisa or Jeff or the law enforcement officers. It's about a system that's above what's happening. And that is what I am aiming to change. That is the work that I'm aiming to do for all of us. And so, I think it's why I'm thankful to have such a great relationship with law enforcement in this state, because when things get heated, I remind them, this isn't about you and it isn't about me. Please join me up here in this conversation to talk about the system. And as a social worker and an educator, that's the way I look at things, is through system change. And I also understand that changing a system takes incremental step-by-step work, and you have to be in it for the long game, right? And this is not all going to happen in one legislative session. We have colleagues that are going to follow after us and keep bringing forward these bills, and we already are seeing that. So yes, this work that all of us are doing, Senator Keim has a great bill in state and local focused on the sheriffs. They can be taken as little pieces, but they're all parts of changes to a system. And yeah, that's really what this work is about. And thank you for allowing us to frame it that way right from the top.
You mentioned Senator Keim's sheriff's bill, so I'll turn to you, Senator. Your county experienced a very high-profile case of a sheriff betraying the public trust. Former Oxford County Sheriff Wayne Gallant resigned in 2017 after an investigation found he had solicited his employees and others for sex. He was also under investigation by the FBI. Do you hear from your constituents about their trust in police? Is it connected to that case, or is it more general? Do you hear from some people who trust police more than others? And what can Maine police do to earn trust?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, so for my constituents, and of course, for the first bill I ever put in, it definitely stemmed from the situation with the Oxford County Sheriff. And the really important thing to note about that is that it isn't just the people of the county that he broke trust with, but it was also the men and women that work under him and in the sheriff's department. And so this bill that I put in to create more oversight is for them as much as it is for the people that the Oxford County Sheriff is supposed to serve. Because when someone at the top is found to be dirty, everybody gets smeared with that same just sort of ugliness. And in this instance, there was no way for everyone to get clean, right? To resolve the issue, to figure out what happened, and to move forward with a new slate. So my bill is really addressed at trying to make sure that we can find out the truth, because sunshine is the best antiseptic, right? We just need to know what's going on, and we need to make sure that we have the information to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think nationally, concerns, of course, have crept into what I hear from my constituents. But I would say in general, they're trusting of the local police. They are their friends and neighbors, and the changes that they want to see aren't generally aimed at a specific person. It's seeing what's going on nationally, and really just wanting to make sure that we're paying attention here in Maine and making sure our systems are appropriate. And for myself, I absolutely want to make sure they're state appropriate, right? We're Maine, we're not the nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to give a little bit more detail about that legislation, you've been trying to shepherd it through for more than 2 years now, and it would create a way to put Maine sheriffs on administrative leave while they are investigated for ethical violations or for breaking the law. So currently there's no way to do that, which we saw play out with the former Oxford County Sheriff. So while he was investigated, he allegedly destroyed evidence because he was still the top law enforcement officer. Sheriffs in Maine were supporting your bill until just this week when they pulled their support over an amended version. In 2019, sheriffs also opposed this bill, and it ended up dying. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about all of this on you. You've in the past talked about the specifics of the bill, and I wanted to get a sense of its importance to you how do you feel, when you talk about this bill? How has this ongoing struggle and debate, which has, garnered a lot of attention statewide, affected you, your life? How? Tell us about how it's affected you.
Yeah, so I think I find that they're pulling the support to be troubling because, again, the bill is only aimed at them. And it's to create oversight just for a very small group of law enforcement, which I highly respect the constitutional office. But they're not above the law. And we have seen through your reporting that there have been issues, and Wayne Gallant was not the only issue. And so in order to have accountability, just as they would do for anyone serving underneath them, there should be a time where they can be removed and there can be an investigation done without their having the ability to destroy evidence or to meddle in that evidence. They have an incredible amount of authority, which I'm glad for. I think the system is a good system. But this one tweak needs to happen. It's imperative. And I think for legislators, we're balancing an office that we respect and law enforcement that we respect that are currently holding that position. But it isn't about any one man that happens to be there now. It's about improving the system. So I'm in hopes that legislators can balance what is a greater need over and above a personality that they may like and, a friend that they may have in law enforcement, and look at what is best for people moving forward and a good system.
Yeah. How do you, when you're talking about this bill to people, how do you personally feel? Do you feel frustrated that you're still talking about it, or is it something that you expect?
I think, given the amount of respect the sheriffs have, I think that it's difficult for people to separate this bill, especially lawmakers, right? I think the general public don't have an issue separating it as much, but I think for lawmakers, they have a difficult time separating this bill from somehow being a censure on the men that are in office right now. So I am frustrated they pulled their support. I think that it is short-sighted because they should recognize the national moment that we're in, and they should come to the table. They should be honest about the need for oversight and not put up objections when I have put out the good faith offer, as has the Attorney General's office, and to work with them on language to find a path forward. But as you know, I gave them the language for the amendment 4 weeks before the work session, and then they just showed up and said, nope, that doesn't work for us. Even though I reached out many times and said, well, let's find something that does work for you. So that's not the right message they should be giving. And it's a message that the legislature needs to understand how it played out, so that that informs their decision-making on this bill, because it will still come to a floor vote.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Senator Keim, for those who don't know, can you explain, what happens next for the bill? What's the path forward?
Sure. So actually currently on this bill, the committee is holding it, and the Attorney General is looking at the language of it to consider the objections that the sheriffs had once again. And so if it's possible, we'll still amend it in committee and before it comes to a floor vote. But then at that point, if it continues on its journey, it will leave committee with just 2 members of the committee voting in favor. And it will move on to a floor vote, and each caucus will discuss the bill and probably have some lively debate, I would imagine. And then lively debate will be sure to be had on the Senate floor, because I will definitely be speaking pretty strongly on the bill myself. And I know Representative Evangelos, who has worked with me on this bill the whole time, he will be speaking on it, I'm sure, strongly as well on the House floor. So then it's up to the whole committee, but the bill has the support of the governor's office and the attorney general's office, and was really a very good faith effort on all of our parts to come together at the table with the sheriffs and create a better system of oversight.
Well, I'm going to ask Representative Evangelos a question now, speaking of. So Representative Evangelos, you're currently sponsoring a bill to eliminate the ability for police officers to assert a defense of qualified immunity when they commit civil rights violations. For those who don't know, qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that shields government employees, such as police, from liability for their misconduct, except for in rare circumstances. You believe, and many agree with you, that the measure will increase accountability in law enforcement officers and therefore enhance the public's faith in law enforcement. Still, many people have strongly testified against your bill, saying it will pass on the cost of lawsuits to police families, make it harder for police departments to hire officers, and is unfair to those protecting the public. You yourself are from a police family. Will you explain to us how you came to have your views on this issue?
Well, as Representative Warren knows, because we've talked about it, I've been like this all my life. And growing up in a turbulent time in the 1950s and 60s, and I had a police officer in the family, my father, a state trooper, but you know, things were different then, and I learned from a different example. My father never came home in his uniform. He always changed up at the barracks because he didn't want to be a police officer outside of his, times of duty. He wanted to coach Little League and didn't want to, strut around. He never brought the cruiser home. So you never knew he was a police officer. He was proud. In 23 years, he never once used his gun. And he went through an evolution in the 1960s. And we had a lot of arguments, but he went through an evolution, ended up becoming the police chief in one of his last jobs at the University of Rochester, and his best friend became the first African-American police officer ever hired in the state of New York. And when my father left that job, he went to the Board of Trustees and recommended that gentleman. So it's been a process of evolution, but one of the things we're encountering, and I'm going to be frank with you tonight, we just witnessed Monday the Justice Department announce an action against Louisville, Kentucky. And what happened immediately upon that action? Both the mayor and the police chief came out publicly and spoke in favor of the Justice Department's actions. They embraced it. They said, we need to fix this. The police chief said that quite frankly, this action needs to go in every state of the nation to restore transparency and accountability and restore the public's faith in law enforcement. We're not getting very much cooperation in Maine from the law enforcement community. They're digging in. Senator Keim found that out the hard way. The testimony today against qualified immunity was only from police officers and police officer families. Outside of that, and in my testimony, I pointed out that the Cato Institute, a conservative organization and think tank, did a poll recently that stated that 63% of Americans want the abolition of qualified immunity. How much have the recent events shaped our thinking? Well, they haven't shaped my thinking because I've been saying all along since the 1960s, this is what's been going on. And people thought, well, you're crazy. But for the people with their cell phones and their cameras, we'd probably still be in a really bad place. But people are taking pictures. And it's incredible to me that with police body cams and cruiser cams, the misconduct continues. And when Representative Warren talks about a systemic problem, I mean, that underscores it. If I was in high school and they put body cams on us as rascals in high school, I'd be careful, right? I'd make sure I wasn't doing anything while the body cam was on. But the misconduct is continuing even while they're being filmed. So this has been a process of evolution for me. I've always been this way, but I'm learning. This is a learning process. I'm a historical researcher, but I'm still learning every day. I learn more and more about the problems. But the basis for the qualified immunity court rulings, and let's be clear, this qualified immunity is not a legislative doctrine, it is a court doctrine. And the ridiculous circumstances in which it was ensconced into this court rulings came in a Jackson, Mississippi case where some African-American clergy members were attempting to integrate a bus station. They were arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. They hadn't done anything wrong. And they pursued a court case against the police for arresting them and violating their civil liberties. And they were prevented from pursuing a claim. And that was the incubation of the modern qualified immunity standard. But now we have 4 states and New York City having revised that policy, and these reforms are sweeping the nation. What we're witnessing in Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Minneapolis, I could go on, Colorado, is the law enforcement community, the district attorneys, and their attorney generals embracing reform. We're not there yet in Maine. And Representative Warren's comment about incremental change, that's okay, but what happened from Reconstruction to 1964 was that we were working incrementally, and then Dr. King came along and wrote a book called Why We Can't Wait. And in 1965, it wasn't incremental anymore. We got the Voting Rights Act, and everything just, exploded in one progressive moment. And I think we're there again. I think Senator Keim may have mentioned the word movement. This is a movement very similar to the 1960s. So this is an opportunity and chance to change things. And if we squander it, it's shame on us. So I think the courageous prosecutors and law enforcement district attorneys around the country who are embracing change has helped motivate all 3 of us to bring these bills forward. I brought a bill forward 3 years ago now on the police officers' use of deadly force. I wasn't responding to anything that had happened recently in the country. I was responding to a case that happened 5 minutes from my house when the Waldoboro police murdered a boy. 5 bullets in the back. He was unarmed. He was just running into the woods. September 23rd, 2007. I wasn't in the legislature at the time. I was just an activist and a regular person. I raised objections, and friends of mine at the state and local level in law enforcement said, no, everything's fine. And I said, geez, I don't think this one's fine. Well, we investigated it thoroughly. Representative Warren was on a team where we vetted this case, and we did convince the Attorney General to reopen the investigation on that case. We've waited 2 years, and so we're still waiting.
Representative, you're talking about Gregory Jackson?
Yes, I am. I'm talking about Gregory Jackson, an 18-year-old boy.
In 2007.
September 23rd, and he was a passenger in a vehicle. He'd been drinking beer and got scared and ran into the woods, and he was executed. You want to restore the public's faith in law enforcement, but when we have an Attorney General's office that investigates themselves, the police investigating the police, we don't have any independent oversight. That doesn't give people comfort. And when we have a score approximately 170-0, all rules justified, people lose faith because they know the fix is in. They know that, I'm being frank with you, these are cover-ups on the tough cases. They just can't get to the point of holding the police accountable in these cases. And it's taken Maine, Representative Warren knows we've waited 2 and 3 years for the Attorney General's office to get onto some of these cases. And what's happening around the country? It takes a week, right? Within 2 days, the police officer is off the force. Within a week, the prosecutor brings criminal charges against them. I'm talking about these cases where the victim is unarmed, hands up, or running away, and no effort to de-escalate. So yes, we have a crisis of confidence. I think the reporting by the Bangor Daily News and the Press Herald has been so instrumental and enlightening, and it is changing the public's outlook regarding their faith in law enforcement. The way to change it is for law enforcement to embrace the change, to go into Senator Keim's state and local government committee bill and embrace the change. Yes, Oxford County wasn't right. We're going to change it. There needs to be a way to hold people accountable when they behave this way. You know what you've run into with the sheriff's office and the Portland Press Herald with the state police. There's total non-disclosure. Everything is hidden. And they sign non-disclosure agreements with officers that have been disciplined. So maybe the officer leaves the department, but the department down the road hires them because their discipline is in a non-disclosure agreement. We never even get to find out about it. So whether you want to call them bad apples or good apples, some of the people that shouldn't be in law enforcement continue to practice. And I'll wrap this up, but we have this police officer, John Darcy, with the Maine State Police, who's now involved. I've gotten information from the lawyers in these cases. It's over 40 different cases of racial profiling he's been alleged to have been involved in. And we've seen some of the tape recordings of how he speaks. And the Maine State Police gave him the Trooper of the Year award. How much faith did that give anybody? They gave it to him in November of 2020. Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I mean, that should have been an awakening. And instead, they give a racial profiler the Trooper of the Year award. Either, and I was quoted in the press on this, and I'll repeat it, either the high command of the state police doesn't watch the television and is not absorbing what's happening in the nation, or they were flipping off the Black Lives Matter movement and sending a signal that they're not approving of the racial justice movement. It has to be one of the two things. So I did file a complaint on that. We're in a crisis nationally, but watch the courageous police officers like the state trooper at the Fusion Center, who without him, Representative Warren, without him, we wouldn't know. We wouldn't have known the depth of what was going on there, although the professor at the University of Southern Maine has done groundbreaking work, the depth of the violation of our citizens' constitutional rights. So we have this imbalance. And when we are the civilian overseers. And I want to make this point. When President Eisenhower was elected in 1952, he was asked, "General, are you going to wear your uniform?" And he said, "No. I'm the civilian leader of a civilian nation, and the police and military are subservient to civilian rule." But last summer, when we asked Commissioner Sostak questions about the Fusion Center, he either refused to answer or gave misleading answers. So they don't respect the chain of command, and we are reassuming that now through this legislation. They have to be held accountable.
Representative, we've gotten a few questions. If you don't mind, we can
Jump around, sure.
In particular about qualified immunity.
Sure.
And one person would like to know if the protection is stripped away, how would we address what could be inevitably a dramatic pullback in law enforcement response to anything that could be categorized as subjecting an officer to a lawsuit? How would you address all the frivolous lawsuits that will almost certainly come forward? How can you expect officers to carry on as usual without any protection?
Sure. Well, we heard all that today, and it's not substantiated by the facts. The woman who testified for the Maine Trial Lawyers Association rebutted all of that. The states that have abolished qualified immunity haven't seen any difference.
Is that just
and we get frivolous lawsuits now. So my view is that police officers who respect the civil liberties and civil rights of their citizens and do their job are never going to have a problem. but
Okay.
those that don't are going to be held accountable. They shouldn't be protected by the courts. And people who lose people to police violence should be able to hold them accountable, and they're not. And so the problems that are occurring are of the law enforcement's own making. The good police officers know this, and they know that qualified immunity isn't going to be a threat to them, despite what they're saying. And the other piece of propaganda they were selling today was the lawsuits and all of that. Police departments are required to carry professional liability insurance. And those policies require the insurance company to provide a defense. But as the attorney said today, lawyers operate by very high standards. They get sanctioned for bringing forward a frivolous case without evidence. So it's just not going to happen. This is fear mongering. We had an incredible array of testimony in favor of that bill today, both from victims of law enforcement violence. The American Civil Liberties Union spoke very forcefully. We even had Ben and Jerry's from Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream. They have an organization to abolish qualified immunity. They weighed in. I just think that good law enforcement officers have nothing to worry about. They're not going to be held accountable for doing the right thing.
And Representative Evangelos, this was before the Judiciary Committee or the Criminal Justice?
It was before the Judiciary Committee. Just today, we held like a 4-hour hearing.
Okay, and that's recorded too. I think this is a subject or in particular that is intensely debated. And if people want to check into that recording,
It was intensely debated today.
Yeah, today specifically. So clearly, you're not shy about criticizing law enforcement and challenging them on some of their stances. But you referred to, and you named a bunch of examples in Maine and across the country as to, that support your positions. But you also referred to a sense of momentum. And I'm curious what you're most hopeful about in Maine, if there are any specific bills that you are hopeful about.
Well, hope is not a strategy, but we'll have to see. As Senator Keim said, we try to get these bills through the committee, and then we have to fight it out on the floor. We don't know what Governor Mills is going to do in reference to the reform movement. We haven't heard anything really one way or the other than she seems pretty strongly opposed to having parole, which is a very strong commitment of mine. And I think we need a parole system restored. We can't be having training and education and other types of programs in our prison facilities. And then it doesn't result in a pathway. You probably know that I sponsored Brandon Brown's clemency petition. He got into a PhD program last year at George Mason University. He's got very limited time left on his sentence. And we asked the clemency board to let him go to Virginia and earn his doctorate degree. Unprecedented. And that could have been the greatest story right now, right in Maine, that we had this success story coming out of the Maine State Prison. But the Ravenna Institute of Justice at the University of Minnesota, in a report recently, said that Maine has the harshest determinative sentencing in the country. And what that means is you get sentenced very harshly and there's no exit because we don't have parole. So when you match up the harshest sentencing in the nation and the lack of parole, you can be in prison for 30 to 50 years or in a master's degree, get a 4.0 average, do really good work in the prison and never give anybody a hard time. And you're going to get out the same day as the person who does nothing and gives the guards a hard time. And that is just, that's insane, So in my testimony last week, I called it killing hope. And that's what we're doing. We're destroying the aspirations of people that are holding themselves accountable and seeking to redeem themselves. And
have you seen
real quick, but in Brandon Brown's case, even his victim wrote a letter forgiving him and asking the governor to release him. I don't know what more we can do.
Yeah. Are you paying attention to any bills in particular where you think, oh, that has a really good chance of passing? Anything that it doesn't have to be your own, but something that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, we have bills, a lot of bills in the Criminal Justice Committee and the Judiciary Committee. I'm hoping they all pass. Representative Warren's got bills regarding defunding the Fusion Center. There's a bill around the disclosure of investigative records and other types of police issues, such as police shootings, because there's a word in there in the law, I had it here somewhere, but it says that it's the word interfere. But Representative Warren was on a call with me and several other legislators last month, and we asked the Attorney General, the law says that you're not going to release information if it interferes, but the word interfere is subjective. And we asked him point blank, you have the authority to interpret that law to release these records immediately, such as body cam and cruiser cam footage and the like. And he admitted he did. He said, yes, I have the authority. And we asked him point blank, are you going to do it? Are you going to start doing it? And he wouldn't answer us. We found out in the Jason Gora case that he released the footage the day after they ruled his death by firing squad justified, because that's what it was. He was running away.
Yeah, maybe Representative Warren can talk a little bit about what that law is. That's not the Glomar law, is it? I'm not sure what statute you're talking about there.
It's all in a similar section, yes. And for people that don't know, what's referred to as the Glomar provision is the provision that we have had in our statute. We are, I think, one of only 2 states in the country who have it, that requires that the state police must neither confirm nor deny that they're using certain technology. It is in the same statute that Representative Evangelos is talking about, of not releasing video from police cams, which I don't understand why we have police cams if they're not to be released. And it's the same statute that Representative Evangelos is talking about. There's a bunch of language in there that we are trying to get changed in order to create more transparency in Maine.
Okay, so, and just so we can all understand the Glomar response, this is the statute, as you said, that police have cited as the reason for why they can't disclose whether they're using certain surveillance methods. And so your bill wouldn't make agencies release information. It would just not require them to issue a non-response about the information. Is that right?
Yes, exactly right. It would give law enforcement the discretion of if they want to answer the question or not.
Okay.
Because sometimes they want to be able to share that information, certainly. And there's no reason why, to stop them from sharing that information. It's not going to use the word that Representative referenced, it's not going to interfere. And they want to be able to just answer the question. But we have a state law, portion of our state law that disallows them from doing that. This just removes that piece of the statute.
I found it. It's Title 16-804.
Okay, thank you. So I think we're going to move now to some other reader and audience questions. So if people want to continue to post questions in the Q&A function, then that would be great. We also had a number of readers write in previous to this with questions. So one of them focused on discipline. So we know Maine requires similar training, centralized training for officers. And this reader wanted to know, why aren't performance reviews and disciplinary actions maintained the same way? And should they be? Should there be a centralized place where maybe we can keep discipline records, which are public? So I would open that up to you guys.
If I could start off, just because our committee did a week ago unanimously, and my committee is, the Criminal Justice Committee is made up of Republicans, Democrats, and independent member of the legislature. We unanimously voted to make, to do a few things. So let me answer the question this way. Make public when law enforcement receives an action from the Criminal Justice Academy, to make that public, to make the discipline action not just what the discipline was, but also what led to that disciplinary action. Again, this was a unanimous vote. It was supported by the director of the Criminal Justice Academy. It is supported by law enforcement. Also, to create a code of conduct or set of standards. We are working on that language. This was also supported unanimously and by the director of the Criminal Justice Academy. The reason these votes aren't out publicly yet, other than us talking about them, obviously, is they happened less than a week ago. We also are working on releasing disciplinary records at department levels. That is a bit of a tougher lift, only because we're trying to figure out how do we do that statutorily. In some ways, it means that law enforcement must sign a waiver that their personnel information will be able to be shared. So we're having great conversation about that. One of those bills was actually brought to us by Sheriff Joyce, Cumberland County Sheriff Joyce. It was brought to us by Representative Patrick Corey, but Sheriff Joyce wrote the bill along with the representative. So we are seeing a lot of proposals around these issues that you just brought up, that either, you know, we as the public or even other agencies, when they're hiring, can't have access to, you know, when somebody's been you know, had an action against them. And I just want to be really clear that mistakes happen in every profession. Mistakes happen in every profession because we are all human. And I'm a social worker and an educator, and social workers and educators also make mistakes, but they're not hidden, right? Because as a social worker, I want to make sure that my profession is respected and transparent, because our jobs are important. And that's how I feel about law enforcement. And that's why we need to change the sort of, you know, hiding of when somebody makes a mistake, because people make mistakes, every single one of us. And so, you know, those are things that I'm really hopeful are going to move forward. Again, I have a lot of hope for Senator Keim's bill. Her colleague, Representative Pickett, has a similar bill around the sheriffs. And I'm, you know, I have good hope that these things are going to move forward. And I know that you didn't specifically ask this question verbally, but you did send it to us in your written questions. These are bipartisan efforts. These are not just Democrats. It's not just, you know, lefty, you know, nut jobs like me. Like it's all of us, and it's important. So thank you.
Yeah, that's it's all very interesting about the changes that are coming right now in terms of making the misconduct public that leads to discipline. So we'll be paying attention to how that unfolds.
If I could just jump in there real quick and just add, just practically speaking, there are union contracts and human resource policies that differ from department to department. And it is personnel information that they, you know, signed on with an agreement that it would remain private. So I am in favor of us looking at policies that, you know, cover more broadly what information should be confidential and what information should be public. You know, recognizing and respecting that these are people's private lives, and we don't make records public for a lot of people. So, you know, so we do have to be careful of private lives and balance that with the public's right to know.
Mhm. Right. And so, as we know, these types of discipline records are already public, and they, in many cases, have instances of, very good descriptions of what happened for someone to get punished. And then in other cases, that is not included in the records. So it really varies place to place, um, based on who's putting them together. I'd like to just go to another question. This one, this person has asked, has there been an appetite to develop legislation surrounding a registry or some process to identify officers with giglio concerns? So of course, these are officers who have been found not credible to testify in court. To the extent that there were policies and requirements developed for such identification or registry purposes, could you envision something like what New Hampshire does, or something different? New Hampshire releases some information about giglioed officers. As far as I know, this isn't in any current bills, is that right? The issue of giglio cops.
I can just speak to the issue of a more public database in general. One of the things that we've learned is that our Maine Criminal Justice Academy does report into a national database of all sorts that collects all sorts of data on police misconduct. And the problem with it is it exists, but nobody can see it. So we do have another proposal that came to us as I won't get into the weeds. We are trying to work on a database that is not only accessible for prospective employers, so municipalities, state police, county jails, etc., but also accessible to the public. And I think that that's really important for the same reasons that I want to know what kind of professional history my dentist has, right? I want to know that a therapist is still licensed and that they don't have complaints, right? I mean, we all want to be as informed as we can be when we are choosing whatever professional we need in our life. Or as a former municipal official, I wanted to know about the people that we were hiring in our city. And that should not change when it comes to law enforcement. And so that is another piece that we're working on, is a public database. Now, as Senator Keim said, it is very important for us, all of us, to make sure that we also have our right to privacy. So balancing these two issues is very important and is difficult, but we can do difficult things. We do it all the time. You just have to have the political will to do it. And I think that we do, and I think it's a bipartisan political will.
We have a question from Michael from the audience here. As a person of color who has been pulled over for no reason in Maine and elsewhere in the US, I wish they would have people of color testify on these committees. Will we be hearing from people of color in any of the testimony on these bills? And I think you can maybe speak, to your memory on that, but I would also kind of maybe expand on that to say that, something we heard over, especially last summer, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, was that Maine may be a very white state, but it's not immune from racism. And I'm curious, but as you well know, the Maine legislature is a very white body, and I wonder maybe how you've sought the input of Mainers of color in crafting some of your policies.
Well, I'd like to answer that. We heard a work session on a bill today, an act to amend the laws governing post-conviction review in order to facilitate a fair hearing when there's newly discovered evidence. There are several African-American incarcerated individuals who have asserted their innocence and who are serving very long prison sentences. And in a couple of the cases, they are there because of the Giglio and Brady concerns, the withholding of exculpatory evidence, and the police withholding evidence. So in our hearings, I have reached out to these families. It was the same for the parole hearing, but Foster Bates's father, he came up 2 years ago. Foster is an African-American gentleman in the Maine State Prison. He pled innocent. New evidence has come forward. Just so the folks know, what this bill does is Maine is one of the few states left in the union that has a time limit when new evidence emerges. So if you're stuck in prison and new evidence emerges that would clear you, you've only got 1 year from the point of discovery of that evidence to bring it forward and make a case. If it goes over even by 1 day, they deny you a hearing to even hear the evidence. So we don't do that in the whole cold case homicide squad, which I supported. The authorities are able to bring evidence that can be 20 and 30 years old, and they bring it forward. And I'm not talking about DNA in this case either. I'm talking about witnesses who have come forward that would clear the person. So I've reached out to these African-American families, and they have testified. Foster's father testified on 2 bills last week. He testified on the parole bill. He testified on the post-conviction bill. The Hilton family testified. 3 members of the Hilton family testified on parole. Leo's in prison. He got a sentence of 50 to 90 years. His mistake he made was when he was 18 years old. Nobody died in the commission of his crime, and he's taken responsibility for it. He's in a master's degree program now. Earned a 4.0 average at the University of Maine bachelor's degree program. But it's so tragic. So yeah, you got to do the groundwork because we are a very white state. But 1.5% of our state is African American, but 12% of our incarcerated at the Maine State Prison are Black. So that points up to a very serious problem. We know that we have this state trooper targeting African Americans. I mean, I've read the dossiers at the lawyers, the excuses he's using to pull these people over. They were driving in the middle lane. I mean, has anybody here ever driven in the middle lane of a 3-lane highway? Of course we do. But they're just finding any excuse. And then we hear what's on the recordings with this cop, calling these African American individuals, the worst names in the book. So we are reaching out to get them involved because they are disproportionately victims of our criminal justice system, and we need to hear their voices. So they have been testifying on my bills, and it's powerful testimony. It really is, but we need to do more work on that. It's a good question, and thank you for asking it. But I do want to make one other point. Because I know one of the excuses we're being given in the resistance to making these reforms is, well, we don't have that problem in Maine. We're a white state, and we don't have the police integrity problems around these issues. But in my own research, many of the victims of this police misconduct are the victims of socioeconomic profiling. They're poor white people, to put it simply. And they are a victim of this as well. And they're a victim of it on the police shootings. They're a victim, the prison's full of difficult situations. Also, unfortunately, and Representative Warren knows this very well, we're incarcerating people for mental illness. We're incarcerating people because they have a drug problem. And
I just want to say we're at 7 p.m. So I think we're going to ask one more question and then wrap this up if that's okay with everybody. And everybody will get an email with this recording who's attended. And we'll, as reporters, we'll continue to ask some of these questions too that are coming in. So I don't want to ignore all of them, but Callie, there was another question.
Yeah, we had a question about body cameras, and I know Representative Evangelos, you mentioned earlier how much is caught on video these days now that we carry phones and cameras in our pocket. And somebody asked about whether body cameras are required in Maine. I don't believe they are required. Maybe I can open up to your thoughts on whether they should be.
Representative Warren would probably know if they're required.
I thought that there had been a proposal and it didn't.
But really briefly, even when we have the body cam or cruiser cam footage, this law that Charlotte, Representative Warren mentioned, Title 16, Section 804, limitation on dissemination of intelligence and investigative record information. And it basically says that they're not going to release anything, paragraph 1, if it interferes with criminal law enforcement proceedings, and paragraph 3, if it constitutes an invasion of privacy. Those are the two main excuses they're using.
I'm wondering what Senator Keim thinks about this. Are you in favor of making body cam footage public?
I would say generally yes, but I think that we have to be, that there's always a qualified answer, I think, to just saying, do you want to make something blanketly public, right? Like what are the safety concerns around that, and what are the privacy concerns around that are important as well. And I do have concern with really violent things that happen to people being made public, because I think that the families might have real difficulty with that. So I think that should be part of the consideration as well.
Mm-hmm. And just one last question. So one person has said the mistakes the police make can have devastating consequences. What can be done to immediately raise awareness and bolster public participation in the process? I'm assuming the legislative process.
Transparency. And we have to look, we're not leading in Maine. I mean, the legislators are leading, but we're not leading. Our criminal justice community is not leading. And we see what's happening around the nation. We see what leadership looks like. We've seen it in Atlanta. We've seen it in Minneapolis. We saw it in Louisville on Monday. That's what leadership looks like. When the criminal justice leaders come out and say, yes, we need to undertake these reviews. We know we have a problem and we've lost the confidence of the public. And we're not doing that here yet. We're being obstructed and fought. And part of it is having conversations with the law enforcement community, but when they continually show up to these hearings and deny there's a problem, I mean, that was what we heard today on the qualified immunity bill. 90% of the police who testified say we don't have these problems in Maine. We have very serious problems in Maine. We have innocent people in prison who can't even get a hearing. We have unjustified police shootings that are ruled justified. Our problems, we're no different in Maine. Don't anybody kid themselves. The problems here are just as serious as across the nation, but we need leadership, and we're not getting it from the law enforcement community right now. We're just not. Sheriff Joyce has been helping some, but
I'm gonna butt in, Representative, so that Senator Keim and I can also weigh in. I think because I want to answer the question about how do the folks that are listening tonight get involved. Every one of us and every one of our colleagues want to hear from you. The way that we make decisions, is balancing out what we're hearing in committee, and most importantly, what we're hearing from our constituents. So we need you to reach out to us. Lawmakers need to hear from you that you believe that an injury to one is an injury to all. And what I mean by that is we are hearing sort of, I think the talking point is, oh, these are Maine, we're trying to make Maine policy based on a national problem. And that's just not true. Representative Evangelos talked about that. It's just not true. We have issues here, but also as somebody, I live in D-Hallowell. Does that mean that I only care about people that live in Hallowell? No. Does it mean that I only care about the people that live in the 3 places that I represent in the legislature? No. I also care about people in Portland, and I care about people on Mount Desert Island, and I also care about what's happening in Vermont and New York and Minnesota and California, because I'm also an American. And so do I believe that we need to make policy for all of us? Absolutely. And I think that a lot of your readers think that too, because I do, I do receive a lot of correspondence, and I appreciate that. It helps, it helps me sort of keep on track for doing the work. And I will invite you to also reach out to other legislators because they want to hear from you. It matters to them. And that's how you can all get involved. And I'll stop. I just wanted to thank you again for this opportunity. And, I want to thank my awesome colleagues who are here too, because I so appreciate them and the work they do. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to everybody for being a part of this, for taking the time. And
if I could just jump in before you close out, and just because, yes, we've been a little more silent, but knowing that we're closing up, I do want to reiterate what Representative Warren said. We do want to hear from folks. No one, generally the legislators don't ask people to show up, but specifically, but generally we want to hear from people. And so it is available and open to the public. And I just want to, close by saying, I hope everyone recognizes, and I know that we all do, that we're at a really significant moment locally and nationally to take on these issues. And I believe we need a renewed social contract. But it's two-sided. It needs to be the people of Maine and law enforcement coming together because we all care about public safety. So it's definitely not us versus them. And we won't craft good policy if that is a position that we're taking. And law enforcement, we recognize and we respect that they put their lives on the line for us. And I'm very appreciative of that. And part of that mutual trust that's so imperative is that they have to know we have their backs as well, and that we're working to make this system good for them, to a good place for them to work and to serve us, and to do it with honor and integrity. And we appreciate that. And that's the ultimate goal for all of us. So I just wanted to close by saying that. So thank you so much for having me on tonight. And I'm honored to work with the people in Augusta to take on these difficult issues.
That's great.
I want to thank the Bangor Daily News and your audience and my colleagues. And they're right. We have an open door policy. We're not meeting in person, but some of the reasons why I brought the things forward I have is because people have contacted me with their tragic stories. And both of my colleagues are right. So thank you very much.
And we can see the debates happening at the legislature it's all on YouTube when it's happening during the day, so the public can search for that and find it fairly easily, I think. And you're all very easy to contact. All your information is online. So all right. So with that, I think we are all set. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. All right.
Night,
Night, everyone.
See you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody. See you.